Hello there, it's Paul Fitzgerald here, and thanks for giving me the privilege to have a chat with you for a short while during your busy day. Today we're going to be talking about how you can achieve some key goals for your practice. I'll be showing you how you can take some action right now to put some things in place that will significantly improve how your practice runs, give you better patient outcomes, and also reduce your risk of burnout. Now, is burnout a real issue? Well, over 50% of clinicians report some level of burnout during their careers. In a recent New England Journal of Medicine report, the admin load was by far and away the biggest cause of burnout in clinicians. Now I'm going to show you some ways today to reduce your admin load. But first, let me ask you a question. What if your practice was actually a hugely valuable asset? What if it was full of happy staff who love their job? What if you were blessed with patients who love you and what you do, and tell others about that? Would that give you peace of mind? Would you sleep better at night, and maybe reduce your risk of burnout, knowing that you're building a legacy and a valuable, saleable asset for your long-term future? Or would you love to retire when you want to retire and not have to practice until you're 80? So if that has your attention, guess what? You're in the right place. Now, this session is going to be for you if you're a clinician who wants to improve the value of your practice but don't know where to start. It's also for you if you're a practice owner who is struggling with the complexity of staffing and HR issues. It's for professionals who are prepared to learn and improve. It's also for owners who want to understand and reduce their risk. So if that's you, as I said, you're in the right place. Now conversely, this is not going to be for you if you're a practice owner who is doing just fine. If you're a clinician who's on track to retire on your own terms. If you have no HR issues in your practice, or if you don't want to learn something new or make some positive changes in your life. Now, if that is you, great, sign off now, and I do wish you the best of luck. So why am I doing this? Well, over the years, I've come to discover that practices that run like clockwork have one thing in common, and that's a system. And more than that, it's a system that ties together people, process, and technology. Now, I'm looking for some like-minded individuals who want to learn how to avoid the most common pitfalls in practices. It's things like failing to manage their risk with process. It's failing to manage their people. And it's also failing to manage the security of their technology. Now, I don't know if that's you yet, but we'll see. So in the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to show you how to de-risk your practice in 3 ways. First, by introducing process into your practice with some real examples. Secondly, by actively managing staff. And we'll talk about the secrets of managing staff. Now, by the way, there is no secret sauce, but there are some key practices that you can put in place to reduce the stress of HR. And we'll talk about how to vigorously manage your technology to reduce the risk of cyber attacks and privacy breaches. Now, by following these suggestions, by the end of this session, you should be able to have a practice that lets you spend more time with your patients and less on admin. You'll learn how to create a practice that will be very saleable because you'll have a system in place that consistently provides great patient outcomes and is low risk, meaning you can retire on your own terms. And you can improve patient outcomes because you'll have time to do things correctly without stress. So why listen to me? Well, I've worked in healthcare across multiple care settings for over 30 years. I started life as a pharmaceutical rep, calling on doctors and pharmacies, then specialists and hospitals. And during this time, I got to have a first-hand look at how practices run, the good, the bad, and in some cases, the downright ugly. I also worked with medical device companies and then with healthcare IT companies. Now, I've run multinational companies and also startups, all in healthcare. I was a senior executive in several of these, and then left to work as a consultant to startups, which means I've come across and learned how to fix most of the problems that you face on a day-to-day basis. I've worked with many companies to help them align their values with how they work. I've restructured teams to get optimum performance. And I've also created a number of profitable businesses across the region. I've got extensive experience in people management. I've hired and fired staff and have managed large and small teams, both directly and remotely. I've managed teams in Australia, in New Zealand, in Canada, and also in Vietnam. So I know how hard staff can be, and how hard it can be to get the right people in the first place. but also how difficult it can be to get rid of the wrong people. And I'm also a cyber and privacy risk expert, especially regarding healthcare. Now, I've seen and experienced some real shockers when it comes to security, or what sometimes passes for security. Now, just to allay any fears you may have about a hard sell coming up here, there is nothing for sale today. You can't buy anything from me here, so keep your wallet safely closed. But if you do stay until the end, then I'll have a gift for you that will dramatically change your results when it comes to building a successful and a sustainable practice. And I'll also have a way for you to have all your questions answered for free. So let's move on. Are you doing things the hard way? Are you constantly chasing cash flow? Is cash flow a constant worry for you? Does an irregular money flow stop you doing things that you want in the practice or in your personal life? Do you have any idea of your risk profile and how to manage it? Have you ever sat down and thought about risk in your business? You have locks on the doors, I'm sure, but do your staff have strong passwords on their computers? Passwords that are changed frequently? Or does your practice share login details? Staffing issues, hiring, firing, performance pain. Do staff give you a reflux whenever you think about them? What about when you come to hiring or firing someone? Do you have a formula to do this? Are you at risk of harassment claims or bullying claims within your practice? Would you actually know if it's going on? And is there zero little marketing or patient engagement happening? Do patients just turn up and sit for long periods in your waiting room? Are they greeted with a smile and a positive vibe when they walk in? Are they engaged? Are they educated? Can they access information relevant to them online via your practice website or a portal? How about the simple act of making an appointment? Can they get an urgent appointment, or are they simply told, sorry, no appointments today? And do you have no advice on how to actually run your practice as a business? Do you know where to turn for advice? There are thousands of small business consultants out there, but how many actually understand the business of healthcare? Now, it doesn't have to be this way. But first you need to understand that you're running a business, not just a practice. You became a healthcare professional to help people lead healthier lives. You got into business to build a team to help even more people be healthy. But then you discover it's not enough to be a good or even a great clinician. Now you must be a successful business person as well. And this is a whole new skill set. They didn't teach you this at university. So where do you go? Do you do a 4-year degree in business? 2 years to get an MBA with no specific advice about running a practice? You could do with someone who's actually been there before. Now, as Dr. Corey Schuller points out, it doesn't matter how smart the doctor is. If they can't keep the lights on, they can't help anyone. So let me tell you about an easier way. You can reduce the risk of staff undermining your practice, either on purpose or accidentally. You can put a system in place that manages processes, people and technology, meaning a well-run practice that's valuable to you when it comes time to sell. And all of this leads to great patient outcomes because you have time to spend with them. And you can easily understand your risk universe and how to create a practice that is low risk because you took the time to put a system in place. Now, before we go on, it is important to understand that results will depend entirely on how you engage with the program and implement what you learn. Now, I can give you all the tools and all the information that you need to improve your practice dramatically, but the future is in your hands. So let me now reveal how to de-risk your practice by looking at process, the first part of our system. But first, let me tell you an interesting story about a clinician who thought he was insured for cyber. Now, recently, I had a discussion with a medical doctor about privacy, security, insurance, and a number of other things. For this exercise, let's call him Bob. Now, Bob told me that he thought his insurance cover from his medical defence organisation covered him for cyber liabilities. I suggested that it would be worth checking the fine print. The other day, Bob called me up to say that he'd checked with the medical defence organisation about the cyber cover. Now, after this discussion, I immediately thought of 2 songs that summed it up beautifully. The first one was Things That Make You Go, by CNC Music Factory, and How Bizarre by OMC. Now, according to his insurer, Bob is covered for actual or alleged breaches of privacy or confidentiality. That's great, but his policy excluded fines, such as those that might be imposed by the Privacy Commissioner, damages awarded by courts, such as in a civil claim, or even repayments to Medicare. Now, additionally, there are other exposures, like the impact of the practice through the loss of revenue, forensic investigations, remediation costs, which are also not covered. So what's the potential financial impact for Bob if his practice has a cyber event? Now, Bob may have a regulatory fine imposed by the Privacy Commissioner of up to $1.8 million. He may well incur damages from the Privacy Commissioner, and in recent cases, the Commissioner has awarded about $15,000 to each claimant in cases of health data breaches. Now, under the new mandatory reporting laws that become law in February 2018, just to remedy the breach based on 1,500 compromised patient records, the costs could escalate well beyond $1 million. If you add in fines and damages, then the amount not insured would cost most people their business, their home, and maybe much more. So what to do, and what does he need covered? So Bob needs to consider a specific cyber liability policy that's tailored to his actual risk and his risk appetite. To do so, he first needs to understand his risk profile and the financial exposures he may have, including any potential vulnerabilities. Now, something we encounter on a regular basis assisting health professionals is that many practices have informal policies around privacy and cyber security, but these often are just what we do, as opposed to being formally implemented in writing and in practice. Now, a risk assessment will help your practice with any future accreditation requirements, and if you have a breach, help to minimise the fallout because you actually took privacy seriously and proved it by addressing any vulnerabilities. Now, before you get offended, I know everyone really does take privacy seriously, but can you prove it to anyone? So, how do you de-risk your practice through process? As part of your business planning process, you should be identifying all areas of risk and creating part of that plan on how you're going to manage this. It should cover disaster recovery, loss of key staff, medical misadventure, illness on your part. So your risk universe is made up of three things. Firstly, there's your appetite, the amount of risk that you're prepared to accept in pursuit of your goals as a business. The second thing is your risk tolerance, which is the most risk and the type of risk that you can accept. And finally, your risk capacity, which is the level of risk your business can accept given your capital and equity position. For example, if your business is well cashed up, you may well have a larger tolerance, but if cash flow is tight, there's little in reserve, then your tolerance may be minimal. Now, risk comes in many forms. It can be fire and burglary. It can be staff filing vexatious claims against a practice, or maybe even well-founded claims. It may be your practice is located in a flood zone, or maybe the fact that your business partner is a lot older than you. What would happen if something happened to him or her? Would the practice continue without major impact? Do you have a solid agreement in place that clearly states how equity is dealt with if a partner dies? Now, in this chart on the screen, you can see that there needs to be a formal risk management framework, which is managed by the partners and the practice manager. And when you establish your risks, you should then categorise them as to how likely they are to happen and match that to the severity of the impact of your practice. A matrix like the one shown is a good way to visualise your risk profile. So the second thing to do is to establish policies and procedures and ensure that staff are trained properly and make sure they're written down. So your staff may be very good at what they do, but does your practice have policies and procedures on how to handle a multitude of situations? Are they written down? Usually everyone just gets on and does things, but policies need to be written so you can point to them and say, we enforce these. Now, just as important is the need to actually train your staff on these policies and procedures. Do you have an induction program? Does your practice provide regular staff training to ensure that everyone knows the importance of specimen handling, for example, or the absolute necessity for patient information to be kept private? You should also review your insurances to make sure that you're appropriately insured, especially for any risk that is out of your control. Now, everyone hates to pay for insurance, but it is a fact of life that we need it. So you should regularly review your insurance coverage. Do you have adequate insurance for fire, flood, all those physical risks? How about key person insurance, income protection, cyber liability? I would suggest finding a great broker who understands the healthcare market and work with them collaboratively to ensure that your risk appetite is married up with the appropriate cover. And finally, review any specific standards that are applicable to your practice and ensure that you're complying. Now, standards are a little bit like insurance. We need them, but everyone hates the compliance part. Now, getting ready for accreditation can be a nightmare, especially if you wait till a few weeks before the assessors are due to walk in the door. If you get the practice in order now and maintain a well-run business, the accreditation will in most cases look after itself. As part of your business planning regimen, you should be reviewing the appropriate accreditation standards to which you need to be accountable. Making subtle changes on the way as you work, as these standards evolve, will be much more pleasant than trying to do a major catch-up every couple of years. So here's how this applies to your situation. When you understand your risk, you can sensibly manage it, and that means you can sleep better at night. Also, you'll have the confidence that your practice is running like a well-oiled machine. You'll be comfortable in the knowledge that your insurance cover is appropriate, and that if the worst case scenario happens, you'll be able to carry on. Now the first step is, do you have a business plan? If not, then how do you know where you're going? How will you know when you get there? As someone famous once said, fail to plan, plan to fail. You do need to have a business plan. Yes, there is some time to put it together, but it doesn't have to be war and peace. A couple of pages to clearly articulate where you want your business to go and how you'll manage challenges such as risk is all you need. It doesn't have to be a long drawn-out process, nor expensive. There are hundreds of coaches out there who can guide you through the process, or Google has thousands of free templates. But either way, you do need a plan. Now in this plan, you're going to need to identify the risks that face your business. There are things like physical risks, as we mentioned before. There's fire, flood, cyclones. There's people risk, staff, intruders. Did you know that over half of privacy breaches are caused by staff? There's patient harm. The more busy you are, the more stressed and worried about running things and doing stuff, the less time you have to spend with your patients. Rushed consultations equals less care, leading to a higher probability of harm. And technology, server failures, long-term power outage. What happens to that server that lives under the bench in the staff kitchen, gets someone's lunch all over it? Remember, building a successful business is a marathon, not a sprint. So here's how to apply this in your situation. Once you've identified the risks in the business, we can proactively start to manage them. Now the first step is to decide your risk appetite and the tolerance. Now if you have a couple of $1 million sitting in the bank, well firstly you probably don't need to be here. But if you did, you may well say, okay, I can self-insure for some of this stuff. It's more likely that you don't have that sort of disposable cash. So you will need to decide, either individually or with your partners in the business, just how much risk is okay. Now that's a decision that only you can come to, but you do need to consider it. So wherever possible, eliminate the risk. Perhaps it's as simple as deciding that disaster recovery looks more like having a practice management solution that is hosted in the cloud, so backups and accessibility are more or less guaranteed, as opposed to that server in the lunchroom that could wear someone's cup of soup. Now this means that a possible major risk is no longer a worry, and you can move on to the next one. Eliminate things that produce undue risk. Now some things are not able to be eliminated, obviously, but some can. If your location is flood prone, is it an option to relocate? Now a flood would be devastating in terms of the cost to replace equipment, fittings and even structures, but perhaps you can accept the risk of a 1 in 100 year flood. Make sure you have strong contracts with all your external contractors as well as any internal staff who are on contract. You get the picture. And then insure for uncontrollable risk. So once you've decided what you can and must live with, you need to insure for that risk. A good broker, as I said before, can help you through this process, and use one who does understand the healthcare business. Now all of these things will help you come up with a disaster recovery plan, and you do need one of these. It's no good turning up the morning after your server crashed or the building burnt down and wondering, well, what do we do now? Building a contingency plan is critical. Now again, it may sound daunting, but it doesn't have to be. So how do we de-risk the practice with people? Let's talk about the secrets of managing staff. But first let me tell you about a practice where bullying was allowed to grow and become a major issue. Now this practice was a specialist medical practice where the doctors allowed the practice manager to run the business almost without restraint. She hired, fired, did the banking, all that stuff that practice managers normally do. What they didn't realise, and perhaps they still don't, is that this practice manager was a bully. Now, she wasn't the stand over someone and yell in their face type of bully. She was much too clever for that. She was quietly passive-aggressive. She quietly worked on individual staff members to create divisions with other staff members. She would say hello to certain people and not to others. She would purposely change rosters or patient bookings without telling the clinicians involved. She was rude to patients. She spent much of her day dealing with personal issues involving her family. Now, after getting several of the clinical staff to leave of their own accord, she would then set her sights on the next victim. So when a key clinical contractor complained about her to the principals, they asked this clinician to document the bullying. Now that's pretty hard to do. I mean, how do you document that X didn't say hello this morning but did to everyone else? On paper that looks fairly petty, but it is still bullying. So when this clinician complained again, the principals brought in a human relations expert from the AMA to lecture everyone in the practice about how bad bullying is and not to do it. Now, nothing happened for a week or two. Then the bullying kicked back in with a vengeance because the practice manager knew exactly who had dobbed her in to the principals. Now, they went on their merry way thinking everything hunky-dory, we fixed the problem. Until late one Thursday afternoon, the clinician in question simply walked into one of the principal's office and resigned on the spot. Now, patients had to be cancelled the next day, life was in upheaval. And I think that to this day, they still have no idea what happened. They were very lucky to have avoided a legal action against their inaction. So here's a simple way of managing staff. Here's how you do it. The first thing is ensure that when you hire, you have a set of criteria to which you manage the interview process. Now get help if you need it, using a recruiter for example. You need to have clear and precise position or role descriptions which define the role and the expectations of you and the practice. Be very clear on what is and is not allowed. For example, the use of personal phones during work hours. Use of the practice internet to access Facebook and that type of thing. Be very clear and ensure that when you hire someone, they know this. If you don't know how to do this, use a recruiter, as I said. Your professional body that represents your area will also have templates for interviewing and for role descriptions. Now, using a simple template like this one will formalise the process. It also makes it easier to compare candidates, making your hiring much more objective. So, setting up induction and training programs is important as well. When you start someone, make sure that you're there on the first day to welcome them and show them around the practice. You need to induct the person on fire procedures, accessing information on the network, and other policies and procedures. Now, this could be an hour, could be a week, depends on how thorough you want to be. At a minimum, you need to be able to sign off and have them sign off that they've been shown the fire procedures and other policies and procedures. If you don't do this, it could come back to bite you. Imagine, heaven forbid, you have a fire in the practice and that new person who started last week didn't know what to do and was injured or worse. Liability would be swift and costly. Your staff should have regular training provided to keep them up to date as well. Now, this could be a mixture of online or face-to-face, or at least required reading that provides them with updates or revisions of the practice policies and procedures. Remember, we said these need to be written down. So using an induction checklist like the one on the screen now will give you the ability to ensure that staff are trained properly when they start. You can also get them to sign off that this did happen. Just another way to reduce risk, but by having a hard record that training was provided. Conduct regular performance reviews and provide feedback. KPIs, key performance indicators, they should be agreed with the staff member and then monitored and reviewed. Staff need and thrive on positive feedback. If you need to give negative feedback, do it in a positive way if you can, in a constructive way. The sandwich method actually works very well. Praise, followed by the criticism, followed by praise. And the final thing is, if you don't know how to do this, it does have to get done, so you can outsource it. There are people out there who will do this for you at a modest cost. So now let me show you how this applies to your practice. If your staff have clear policies and procedures that have been trained during induction and regularly afterwards, they'll work much more productively and they'll be happier. And this flows on to your patients. Happy staff, and they will be happy if they know that they are treated fairly and given feedback, will look after your interests much better than unhappy staff. If your staff are unhappy, and it is your job to know this, then at best they may put off your patients. But at worst, they may actually steal from you or sink your business. It's imperative that you interact with your staff. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be good friends with them and go out for drinks on Friday night, but you do need to know how they're feeling. Induct them, train them, and then provide feedback. And finally, as I promised, I'd like to show you how to de-risk your practice by managing the security of your technology. First, let me tell you another story about what happens if you have a data breach. A healthcare record can fetch up to $50 on the black market. Now, this is compared to around $3 for a credit card. You can see why the criminals want to get to your data. If the average 2-doctor practice has around 4,000 records, that's big money for the thieves. Now, they're hunting for personally identifiable information in the way of health records because with that, they can conduct prescription fraud, they can do ID theft, and they can get fraudulent care for someone else under your patient's name. Now, if your practice has a data breach, the Privacy Commissioner can fine you up to $1.8 million for a company and up to $350,000 for an individual. From February 2018, new legislation kicks in that enforces mandatory breach notifications. Now, all practices will be obliged to report any data breach to the Privacy Commissioner, to AHPRA, and to the affected patients themselves. Now, this is going to open the Pandora's box of class action litigation. Now, if you have a breach, the cost of reparation for a breach averages around $350 per record. So again, that average practice with 4,000 records, that runs to about $1.4 million. Normal practice insurances don't cover this sort of loss. So what would an unplanned cost of $1.4 million do to your practice? Would it cause the loss of the business? The loss of your house maybe? How about your family? There will certainly be a loss of reputation. On average, around half of patients will leave a practice if there's a data breach. Could your practice survive this? So, how do you reduce your risk of cyber or privacy breach? Let me tell you how. Do you have written cyber privacy policies and procedures in place? Do you test them, especially disaster recovery? Are they part of your staff induction? Are they part of your ongoing staff training? Do you have solid contracts with third-party providers, especially IT providers? What happens if they have a breach? How does it affect your data? You need to implement different access levels for employees' access to personally identifiable information. Always work on the principle of least access. If someone leaves, immediately stop their access to anything that's sensitive. Require a two-step verification process. Multi-factor authentication is called. If you're on paper records still, transition off them onto an electronic record. Once you've done that, shred those paper records when they're no longer needed. And prevent break-ins by implementing physical safeguards. Make sure there's locks on the doors, deadlocks, security systems, that type of thing. And in summary, the goal is to create a security culture. It's a state of mind. Remember the hand washing promotions a few years ago? They were repetitive, almost boring, but now you probably don't even think for a second about washing your hands. You just do it automatically. Security needs to be the same. So if you're wondering how you can use this, here's how. You can run a complete risk assessment of the practice. Now, many practices use a variety of technologies from faxes to kiosks to web portals. To make sure you're compliant, a risk assessment should be done on the current systems to highlight areas where compliance may not be enforced, and to expose any areas in which changes are needed. Ensure that the latest version of the software is being used, especially including any security patches from the vendor. Now, the risk assessment should also look at your policies and procedures that are in place to manage access to personally identifiable information. Now, I know this sounds big and scary and expensive, but it doesn't have to be. Second thing to do is prepare for disaster before it occurs. All data handled by a practice should be safe both from loss and from corruption. One of the main ways of ensuring the data is not lost in the case of any mishaps is by backing it up daily. Data should be backed up in an off-site location to ensure that in case of incidents such as a natural or a man-made disaster, the backup is not destroyed as well. Your practice manager's handbag is not an appropriate place for the backup to be stored. Antivirus programs should also be installed on all computers to ensure that the data is not corrupted or destroyed by viruses or held to ransom by cyber criminals. As we keep talking about, implement an ongoing employee training program. Any system is only as strong as the weakest link. In some cases, poorly trained employees or temporary staff are the entry point for hackers into the medical practice. It's also these staff who are more likely to have an oops moment and accidentally release some confidential information. Now, a practice could have excellent processes and systems, but if the employees aren't using passwords to securely access the records and the files, then the system security is rendered useless, and anyone can gain access to these records. Practices need to continually train their staff on how to follow the right security protocols to ensure that data integrity and security is maintained. If you're purchasing equipment, look at it from a view of security, compliance and compatibility. Any new equipment bought for a practice should be compatible with existing systems and should offer enough security features. With the advent of connected devices, the so-called Internet of Things, it's critical that these devices are secure, and equally as critical that they're kept up to date after you've purchased them. Now, before making any major purchases, review the product thoroughly to ensure that both security and compatibility will be met. Now, this includes diagnostic devices, computers of all kinds, and even printers. And the final thing is collaborate with affected parties. Changes which need to be made to bring about cybersecurity and privacy compliance can affect pretty much everyone in the practice, but also external providers, your IT providers or any external contractors. Affected groups should be offered training, and management must ensure that the staff understand the importance of compliance to everyone involved in the practice. Also, ensure that your key staff are trained on what to do in the event of a breach. A comprehensive disaster plan is essential and must be practiced regularly. Now, at the outset, I said I'd teach you 3 things today. The first one was how to de-risk your practice by putting processes in place. The second one was to de-risk your practice by actively managing your staff. And the third one was how to de-risk your practice by vigorously managing the security of your technology. So, how'd I do? So what's the real opportunity for you and your practice? Here's how I see it. You can have a high-performing practice with happy staff leading to healthier patients. By making some changes and actively running your practice as a business, you can have happy staff and patients who love you and your practice. You can have a clear picture of your risk universe and be able to manage that, leading to peace of mind, not to mention better mental health. By reducing risk, you can be more profitable, meaning an exit at your own pace. Now, many practices are getting bought up by corporates. If you have a well-run business, you'll optimise your return. With the corporatisation of healthcare practices going on, well-managed, profitable practices will attract a premium price should you choose to sell. Now, the corporates won't be in a position to come to you and offer to bail you out so you can become one of their employees on the hamster wheel. Now, the good news, is it's not about whether you have the complete ability to do this right now. It is about whether you can take a step now and learn the rest as you go, with some help along the way. So what do you need to win in this thing called healthcare, this business called healthcare? You need the right plan. You need the right systems. And you need the right help. So now you have a choice to make. You can click away and forget everything I've just told you. That's fine. But it also means nothing will change. If you really want things to be different and to change your life in this area, then here's how I can help. I told you I'd give you a gift at the end, and yes, we're just about at the end. Now, I've set aside some time in the next 48 hours to speak to 15 people about how you can apply these ideas to your practice starting today. So whatever your biggest problem is, I can help you solve it. So in a 45-minute consultation, I'll help you in 3 ways. The first thing we'll do is talk about your biggest challenge right now. The second thing we'll talk about is how I can help you solve it. And thirdly, I'll set out a step-by-step plan to show you how you can reach your goals without all the issues you currently face in your practice. So just a reminder who this is for. It's for clinicians who want to improve the value of their practice but don't know where to start. It's for practice owners who are tired of staffing and HR issues. It's for professionals who are prepared to learn and to improve. And it's also for owners who want to understand and manage their risk. Now, if you can say yes to all this, then I'm happy to help you for free during a 45-minute strategy consultation. Now, why do I do this? Well, if we make a connection and you're absolutely positive that I can help you achieve your goals, then you may want to apply to work with me. If it's a win-win for both of us, fantastic. If not, that's no issue at all either. So, we have a 48-hour window available only for 15 people. Click on the button you see below and you'll be taken to my online calendar where you can make a time that suits you for me to give you a call and have an obligation-free discussion about these 3 things. So in that call, as I said, I'll help you in 3 ways. I'll talk to you about your biggest challenge that's happening right now. I'll help you solve it. And I'll help you set out a step-by-step plan as to how you can reach your goals without all the issues you currently face in your practice. So click on the button now, make a decision to make a positive change, and I look forward to chatting with you very soon.